As we are getting started, I want to say hello. Thank you everyone for coming to our January general meeting. We're really excited to see all you here. Today we've invited the GSC members as well as early postdocs and anyone who might be interested in hearing about the third edition of the NHERI Science Plan. So without further ado, let's get this started. Dr. Harry Robertson is an Arthur and L. Chu Distinguished Professor of Civil, Environmental, and Construction Engineering at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He also serves as one of the NHERI Network Coordination Office's NCO members and is chair of the NHERI Science Plan Task Group. He received his doctorate in civil engineering at Rice University in 1990 and specializes in structural engineering. And I think without further ado, that kind of helps us get a little bit of an understanding and introduction to Dr. Robertson. Today he'll be presenting on the third edition of the NHERI Science Plan. Thank you, Dr. Robertson.
Thanks very much for the introduction. Let me see, get the right screen. All right, are you seeing this in full screen?
Yes, we are.
You do. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that introduction, and thanks for the invitation to come and present this third edition of the Science Plan. I'm happy to see so many people attending, and I I really enjoy talking to your group because you are the future of NHERI, and so it's nice to be able to hand off the baton because, as you heard, I graduated in 1990. I'm nearing the end of my tenure as a professor, but yeah, this science plan is not the first, of course, it's the third edition. And the NSF required that the NCO, the Network Coordinating Office for NHERI, and each of the NHERI facilities develop a science plan. This was not the case in the previous 10-year NEAS program. There was no science plan. And I think they realized that the research didn't really have a good focus. So our first science plan for the NCO was an assemblage of the science plans from the different facilities, experimental facilities, Design Safe, Sim Center, were in a way merged into one. They were all obviously disparate because they had different objectives for their facility. But that first science plan published in 2017. It wasn't intended to be the final answer. It is a living document. We intended to update it regularly. And so having received input from users, the NHERI community, and from the Summer Institute that you heard about annually at UT San Antonio, we decided to hold a workshop, invited some international hazards researchers. It was held in 2019, and NSF encouraged us to incorporate interdisciplinary teams and disruptive technologies. Out of that workshop came the second edition, but included in it was an appendix with 5 comprehensive research campaigns. These are large research ideas, not going to be tackled by one individual, but teams across the country, interdisciplinary teams, to tackle these major questions that we thought should be the focus of NHERI. They still are good research campaigns, still worth referring to the second edition. It was published in January 2020. And we've had some very good feedback from people who've used the document. So Elena Sutley, Associate Professor at University of Kansas, said, it certainly helped me understand how my research ideas fit into the bigger picture of natural hazards engineering research and what is seen as important from our research community. And Barbara Simpson, Assistant Professor at Stanford, thus, she cited the NHERI Science Plan in her proposal to show that the work plan considers the NHERI Science Plan's objective to reduce reliance on experimental data through the development of more detailed numerical simulations and through the shake table specimen reuse opportunity. There's an enormous amount of data accumulating on Design Safe, and if you can reuse that data, that is something NSF is very happy to see. Petros Sideros, now Associate Professor at Texas A&M, I cited the NHERI Science Plan in my recently successful proposal. Always glad to hear it's successful. I think it is important to continue emphasizing the need for novel computational simulations informed by physical testing. So we hope that in years to come, we'll hear from you that you have incorporated or cited the science plan in your successful research proposals. So why create a third edition? The second edition was pretty good. NSF, in fact, was happy with it, and wondered why we wanted a third edition. Well, there were a number of agency or elements of NHERI that hadn't come to full fruition when we put together that second edition. Converge existed, but was still ramping up. And in particular, they were becoming the lead agency for the various extreme event reconnaissance and research networks, the EARs, as we call them in the center figure. At the time, there were only 4 or 5 of these that NSF was funding. And I have to commend NSF for funding these EARs. There are now 8 of them. I'll talk about them a little bit later. But this extreme event reconnaissance is often what guides new research ideas. We see what fails, we see what works when we look at post-disaster reconnaissance. And that often stimulates research ideas. They weren't mentioned at all in the second science plan. And social science was somewhat was not given the credence that it needed. In the first 2 science plan task groups, there was only 1 social scientist in each of them out of 15 people in the task group, and that was Laurie Peak. In the third edition, we now have 6 social scientists in the 15-member task group. So it's made a big difference to the feel and the emphasis of this version of the science plan. And finally, the Sim Center was a little late in being added to the NHERI family. Plus, their task was develop tools that we as researchers can use, and that takes time. You can't just get the tool off the shelf. Now you can. Now you can go to DesignSafe and use the tools that the Sim Center has created. But we wanted to emphasize the availability of those tools in this third edition. So the new edition better synthesizes social sciences, equity issues, climate change, which wasn't mentioned at all in the second edition, field reconnaissance, also never mentioned, the obvious traditional laboratory research, more simulation tool emphasis, and inclusion of practitioner guidance, how engineering practitioners can help guide your research to address more holistically community resilience to future natural hazard events. And so we convened this enhanced science plan task group that I'll show you now. I'm not going to go through the names. The ones in green were the leadership team from the NCO, but the others are all leaders in their field, a very diverse group from disciplines and diversity itself. And these are the others involved. There's a better picture of me down at the bottom. That's more realistic nowadays. But these really are some special people. If you don't know their names now, you will learn their names over time, especially those that are working in your field. They are leaders in the NHERI community, and it was a pleasure to work with them on this project. So we organized another workshop, 2022, in Alexandria, Virginia. We got together this group and others to make up 63 diverse attendees, researchers, representatives from NSF and NIST, engineering practitioners, early career faculty, and some representatives of the experimental facilities. Yeah, we had 5 excellent keynote speakers, just tremendous, stimulating discussion, creativity, and then broke up into groups to try to develop new research campaigns. And out of the 5 groups came 7 research campaigns, so quite different from what we had in the previous science plan. So really, there are 12 of these campaigns that you can look at to see where you could fit in and where your research finds a home. So it's published October 2023. We're trying to disseminate it as widely as we can. We produced a podcast to introduce the science plan that's available on DesignSafe and on YouTube, I believe. We're planning to create video vignettes to introduce or focus on particular portions of the science plan. And of course, we're making as many presentations like this as we can. You can download it through the QR code or the URL. When you go to the QR codes, by the way, to DesignSafe, you have to scroll down the project page to the very bottom to find the link for the actual PDF. We don't give a link directly to the PDF. So the purpose of the science plan is to provide us, the natural hazards research community, both geophysical, which includes seismic, but also landslide, other geophysical processes, and atmospheric hazards. Rather than just hurricanes and tornadoes, we're now trying to include all atmospheric hazards, including we're wanting the science plan to address NSF and other funding agencies to show them what the NHERI community feels is critical for advancing resilience of our communities. And that it'll provide a roadmap for high impact, high reward hazards engineering research, specifically at the NHERI facilities. I'm sure others may read it and find it useful, but it is targeted at using the NHERI family of facilities infrastructure. And you're encouraged to organize coordinated campaigns. This is not work that can be done by individuals to a large part. It requires multidisciplinary teams to tackle these campaigns. And the research results are intended to prevent loss of life, reduce damage and economic losses, and improve community resilience. That's our goal. To do that, your research has to find its way into practice. And that's a big part of what we've added to this third edition of the science plan. So who are we writing for? What's the audience? Researchers, obviously, in geophysical and atmospheric hazards. Agencies funding this hazards research. You, specifically, junior researchers and graduate students. This is a picture from the Summer Institute, and I will double down on it being an excellent opportunity. Apply, apply, apply. It really is a good experience. And to provide the broader hazards community with common vision for improving community resilience and sustainability of existing and future built environment. So the focus of the science plan is three grand challenges that we see as overarching. If we can solve these challenges, then we're out of a job, right? So it's not going to happen easily. But with the number of people and the expertise in the NHERI family, we're moving our way through these issues. So the first is to identify and quantify characteristics of not only single hazard, but co-occurring and compounding natural hazards, whether geophysical or atmospheric. The second is what is our exposure, vulnerability, and how can we adapt both the civil infrastructure, which was a big focus of the previous science plans, but also our social systems, the communities, the people living in those infrastructure. How can we, first of all, assess their vulnerability and exposure? And then thirdly, how can we invest in a diverse hazards workforce and develop the technologies and tools to support the design, construction, and retrofit and operation of equitable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure for the nation? So what is the problem? How much are we exposed to that problem, and how do we solve that problem? That is obviously the overarching challenge. We've expanded that into 6 research questions, and you might find a home for your research in one of these questions. The first one deals with the EERs. We put them first because we do see that often as the initiation of good research ideas. How do we effectively collect and share data and information to enable ethical, collaborative, and transformative research and outcomes? And what are effective and potentially transformative mitigation actions that we can take to solve these problems? What are the key physical, social, economic, and policy drivers that influence the capacity for resistance, restoration, and renewal, both of our infrastructure and the services they provide to our communities? This, by the way, is an image from a STEER, Structural Extreme Event Reconnaissance, in the Bahamas. I'm going to encourage you to join one of the EERs later. What methodological innovations are needed to support community resilience, both the infrastructure but also the societal system resilience? What barriers and opportunities are shaping the development of analytic and simulation-based techniques? So you heard from a couple of those testimonials that the emphasis is to improve our simulation methods based on experimental testing. And so this is a big part of NHERI focus, is how do we simulate, as you see in the image here, how do we simulate consequences of these events on our societies, both socially and infrastructure-wise. And finally, how do we characterize more accurately the transient and variable nature of the loading actions? Climate change is changing a lot of the atmospheric hazards that we face, including sea level rise, storms intensifying, etc. I don't know if you followed the Hurricane Otis as it approached Acapulco recently and started out 12 hours before landfall. It was a tropical storm. People expecting winds in 45-mile-an-hour range. By the time it hit 12 hours later, it was a Category 5 hurricane, and it devastated a lot of hotels and buildings in Acapulco. Just unheard of intensification because of the increase in the water temperature in the ocean. So yeah, climate change is changing the hazards, and we need to keep track of that. There are also a lot of changes in how we deal with research. There are disruptive and transformative technologies that keep coming up. The ones I've listed here are ones you're probably familiar with because they've become more established. But new ideas are coming up in how we tackle engineering, not just engineering problems. These are developed for all sorts of problems, but there are newer ideas. Don't be shy to use them in your research. So advanced computing, obviously, social sensing and modeling is relatively new. Artificial intelligence and machine learning has been around for a while, but is obviously a major part of how we complete some complex research. Don't just add those names, by the way, to your proposal. They have to be integrated into how you're going to solve the problem. It's not just good enough to have a catchphrase. Bio-inspired engineering has been around for a while, but is gaining, as I'll show you in one of our success stories. And additive manufacturing, of course. I at first thought, well, additive manufacturing, this is 3D printing. It'll be good for creating prototypes and looking. No, you can build a house, you can build a bridge, you can do amazing things now with additive manufacturing. So look at these, look at other ideas of how we can increase the envelope using these emerging trends. Another thing that NCO has done to try to help you as early career researchers, but also the NHERI community at large, is to create a technology transfer committee. This was not required by NSF, but we realized that researchers spend a lot of time doing their work, and then they publish that work, and then it sits, and it doesn't always get into practice. So the TTC was formed in December 2017. It's made up of somewhere between 15 and 20 volunteers. They're mostly practicing engineers with knowledge in the areas of research that we're working on, but also knowledge of how to get that research into building codes or directly into practice. They developed a white paper. That was one of their first tasks, entitled Common Mechanisms for Implementation of NHERI Research Results. How you take your research, or how somebody, but hopefully you contribute to that effort, take your research and move it into practice. It's available at this QR code on DesignSafe. You will get a copy of these slides. Robin, you're welcome to distribute a PDF or whatever of these slides, so you don't have to scan it right now. They also have reviewed all existing NHERI projects, and every new project that gets funded, they review it to see what is the potential for implementation. And they're happy to work with you through your research project. In fact, we encourage you to add an engineering practitioner, if it's appropriate, to your project right at the proposal stage, and let them help you work through so that the results of your research can more easily be transferred to practice. And I've got a quote here from Susan Margulis at the at the NHERI Summit. Forget when that was. Robin will remember, but my memory is fading. NSF has long sought to accelerate the development of technology from fundamental research to move innovations into practice and create those partnerships that make it all happen. So NSF is supportive now of this approach of getting your research into practice. So let's look at some of the successful tech transfer stories from the recent NHERI research. Elena Sutley, I mentioned her with one of the quotes. She was, and a lot of this comes from post-event reconnaissance. She was was doing surveys of buildings after Hurricane Michael hit the Florida Panhandle, and realized that there was a lot of damage to the underside of these elevated buildings. We elevate them for flood, but now the underside of the building is exposed to wind loads. There's nothing in the codes that told you how to solve that problem. So she went to the Wall of Wind down in Florida International University and ran a program to study the pressure on the soffit of the floor, and proposed changes to ASC 7, which is our Bible for loads and design criteria for structural engineering, referenced by the International Building Code. Those changes are now there. ASC 722 edition, ASC 2022 edition has Elena Sutley's results already published for us to use. Machine learning, Forest Masters used machine learning and atmospheric simulation to study topographic effects on extreme wind speeds in Puerto Rico. After the 2017 Hurricane Irma and Maria devastated Puerto Rico, he was one of many who went to observe the damage, came up with this project. There are now maps for the extreme wind speeds in Puerto Rico. Instead of one wind speed for the entire island, it's a mountainous island, same as where I'm living in Hawaii, and the wind speeds up because of the topography. That issue has now been solved by this project. Jamie Paget, now chair of the Department of Civil Engineering at my alma mater, Rice University, modeling of above ground storage tanks during storm events. Again, reconnaissance after hurricanes have shown over years these storage tanks are extremely vulnerable to debris impact, to wave loading, to buoyancy, to floating if they're not totally full. And Jamie has developed approaches to designing them to be more resilient, which are now being used by the oil industry, by port facilities, etc. Shilling Pei, from Colorado School of Mines, saw the need for design guidance codes to design mass timber structures. So timber has typically been limited to about 5-6 story buildings, but the sustainability of timber makes it an attractive building material. But in order for people to build taller buildings out of timber, it needs to have the requirements or guidance provisions in the building code. And so Shilling Pei put together an enormous team, funding coming from NSF, but also from a whole lot of other sources, to run this shake table test at UC San Diego that you might have heard of or seen. It's a phenomenal project, and it has now produced the guidance we need to put into ASC 7 and the International Building Code. And finally, getting back to the microbially induced desaturation, using natural processes to stabilize liquefiable soils. This was a project performed with UT Austin, large mobile shakers. And again, this, once published, this research can be used by geotechnical engineers around the world to improve the liquefaction potential or reduce the liquefaction potential of these silty materials. So a lot of success stories. Look at those. Each of them has about a page to describe them. See how they work through the process of running those projects and getting them into practice. So I mentioned that the workshop in 2022 developed 7 new research campaigns. I'm going to just highlight them briefly here, but there are at least a page or 2 in the science plan on each of these. And you can look through how they're described, find out where your research can advance that research campaign. The first one is understanding and reducing the vulnerability of low-income communities to windstorms. It's tragic how often mobile homes, manufactured homes, suffer during high wind events, and it can be solved. We have the solutions. It's how do we, this is almost more of a societal issue, a policy issue. How do we improve the resilience of these poorer communities to these hazards? Increasing regional resilience to mega seismic events. The Cascadia subduction zone presents an enormous threat to those of you living in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, and if you're in British Columbia. And this research campaign plans to tackle that issue. I talked about compounding natural hazards. Earthquakes often cause landslides. And so the earthquake may not destroy our road or our bridge or our buildings, but the landslide can. So cascading and compounding impacts of natural hazards is another focus. A community-driven integrated research campaign for hurricanes. Hurricanes increasingly cause more and more damage. It's both because they're increasing in intensity, but also people are moving to hazard areas. People tend to move south. They get tired of the winter, I guess. I agree. And they then become more exposed to these events. So it seems like all of our research isn't helping because they keep getting more and more expensive. The losses from these events are so. We have to look at how we improve our communities for these known events that we know are going to happen again. Infrastructure impacts of climate change induced migration. People move from communities where climate change is affecting them, sea level rise, coastline receding. And that damages the community they're leaving, but it also the community to which they move has to accommodate that immigration. So another topic that's worth focusing on. Net zero building materials and construction. How do we reduce the amount of waste from our construction process? This is actually a picture after Tohoku tsunami, where the Japanese did an amazing job at sorting out all of the debris to try to reuse as much of it as possible, and not just dump it all in a hole in the ground. So net zero building materials and construction. And finally, how do we educate communities? How do we educate our children? How do we educate the population as to what we're trying to do and how they can help? Securing our nation through communication and education, or sense. A lot of good ideas there for your broader impacts, or even if you're interested in writing proposals on education, on spreading the word about good engineering. So yeah, you've got a lot of options. And as I refer again to the second edition, the 5 original research campaigns are still excellent. They're different from these, so please look at all 12. All right, so finally, how do you go through this process of developing a proposal? I am still on time, I think. Yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, just a couple more slides. So we've written an appendix specifically for you and other early career researchers. What are the keys to us writing a successful NHERI proposal? And there are 11 points. So obviously they're expanded on in the appendix. Please read through them. You have to have a credible idea, a credible research question. And NSF is emphasizing the need for multi-hazard applications. It's okay to focus on a single hazard, but if your hazard could affect others, or if there's a combined effect, hurricanes obviously have wind and wave and storm surge, including all those hazards in your research question can be helpful. Include a diverse research team, demographically and functionally. What they do, who they are, what their background is, where they're from, has a big impact on bringing their ideas into the research campaign. Include social scientists. We forget often, now some of you may be social scientists, but many of us are engineers. And we sit in rooms with other engineers and we engineer things. And then we expect society to just go ahead and use them. Well, that ain't going to happen. Often we create wonderful solutions, but nobody uses them. And the reason is we weren't thinking about the people who are using them or who we want to use them. So including an economist, an urban planner, a policy analyst, a psychologist, people who can help you understand what society will expect and what your impact is going to be on society, both economically and socially. And don't just add them on as an advisor. Integrate them into your team right from the beginning. Before you're writing your proposal, they should be involved, because everything will depend on their guidance to get your final product as something that people can use. Build a credible team, of course. Convergence is a big focus of NSF. You want to have a diverse and but yet integrated team. They need to work together. You can't have people working in silos and just handing data to each other. You need to get them to converge. Contact the NHERI facilities that you plan to use early on. Find out their availability, their staffing, their equipment. Make sure that what you're wanting to do is something they can handle, and do that right early in the proposal stage. If you're getting other partners, like Shilling Pay, for example, had partners from all over the country, different companies, different people contributing to that Tallwood project. You need letters of collaboration from those people. You have to have proof that they are going to pull their weight. They're going to contribute as you're promising. But don't just add letters of recommendation. Don't just get a buddy or a professor to write a letter saying, oh, this is a great idea, you should fund it. It's only letters of collaboration that NSF will entertain. If you're going to be using a test bed, if you're going to be using a community to study your or to implement your ideas, you must involve them at the very beginning. And I learned this lesson when I was working on an engineering research, NSF large research campaign, or Engineering Research Center, ERC proposal. We unfortunately didn't get it. But one of the things I learned, we were going to be using communities in Florida, one in Texas, one in Hawaii, one in Guam, and one in Alaska. And when we spoke to the folk in Alaska, they said, ooh, before you even start talking about a proposal, you need to speak to the communities. The Inuit communities are really, they don't want somebody coming and telling them that we've got this great idea, you need to do this. That's too late. They need to be involved from the very beginning. So I learned that lesson. So take it from me. It's important that you get that community involved, not just when you're at the point of trying to implement your idea in their community. So get them involved in writing the proposal. Where appropriate, as I mentioned, you should include an industry practitioner. The TTC is developing a list of volunteers who would be happy to help you. They don't even have to be reimbursed or paid. They don't. But if you give them some travel support to get to meetings, etc. But TTC members or people on their list would be happy to help you from the very, I like to call it, from the inception to the implementation. So right from when you're starting writing your proposal, get an industry practitioner, if it's appropriate. If you're doing very fundamental research, it may not be ready for implementation. But if it is, have somebody involved to help you. Plan from the beginning to incorporate how your research is going to be incorporated in education and practice, academic curricula and practice. This can all be part of your broader research, by the way. Anything that gets into an academic curriculum or into practice is proof that you're making a difference in the world, that your research has a broader impact. Include a time horizon. If it's basic research, that may be in the term of decades. If it's more applied research, it could be in the order of years. So give some sort of idea as to when you expect the results of your work to be implemented or effective. And then have other people review. Don't be shy to give your draft proposal to people you trust. Don't give it to anybody. People, unfortunately, are tempted to steal ideas. Give it to somebody you trust to review it. Create a red team of people who do a final review before you send it in to NSF. So I hope that's helpful. There are two other appendices, one that explains each of the 12 and now one new niche facility. Every single one of them has between 3 and 5 or even 6 pages. In fact, this is the majority of the science plan. So when you download it, you'll find it's 130 something pages. Don't worry. The science plan is only 40 or so of those pages. But you can go to the facilities you're planning to use. Obviously, you can go to their websites as well. But the websites are a little more, this is what we have, this is the equipment, da, da, da. These explain what type of research they've already done and what the capabilities are, etc. So there's a lot more information in these appendices than is on their websites. They write them themselves, so they're sort of self-promotional, but they're very good information. And in particular, the Colorado Converge facility is also in charge of these areas: extreme event reconnaissance and research networks. Geotechnical, GEAR, has been around for decades. Social science, extreme event reconnaissance, with Laurie Peak as the director. STEER, with Tracy Kajewski-Correa as director, and that's the one I'm involved in, structural. Nearshore, extreme event reconnaissance. Operations and systems engineering, extreme event reconnaissance research. SUMIR, sustainable material management, extreme events reconnaissance. FEAR, public health, extreme events. And holding them all together and coordinating the whole group is the interdisciplinary science and engineering extreme event research. So if you can't find a home there, then there's a home there for you. So please look up their websites, sign up. They each have a page in Appendix D. It has a link to their sign up page. Join, get involved. This is where you're going to find the ideas for your research, or one of the places you can find them. I've certainly come up with a lot of research ideas out of work with STEER and previous work on reconnaissance. So the intent then of this third edition is that it will serve as a roadmap for NHERI researchers, yourselves, and others working on mitigating the effects of natural hazards on our communities. And to quote Susan Margulis again, NHERI and other scientific networks are critical to move quickly at speed and scale, to go from basic research, fundamental engineering research, to implementation by individuals, communities, and other agencies. The faster we can implement our solutions to these hazards, the better for people and society as a whole. So thanks very much. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. That was so it was very interesting to hear about the differences between the second edition and the third edition. And I think it's a very interesting evolution that I'm curious to learn more about. But I won't jump the gun. If anyone else has any questions, please raise your hand or unmute yourself.
Oh, I see a mention in the comments about the new site. So there is a new facility that's being funded, NHERI it's called, which is looking at high wind effects, not only tornadoes, but downbursts and, or what do they call? Yeah, I think it's a downburst, and direct straight line wind. That was funded after we put together the science plan. So I think it's going to be added to the wheel, the NHERI wheel, just as niche has been added. And we do, by the way, there is an appendix for niche. They existed at the time we wrote the science plan. But that NHERI is another high wind facility that NSF is funding.
Huh. Well, that is very good to know. It's very telling that there's so many things that are evolving so quickly that there are being added on, and there's so many opportunities to collaborate between these ears and these hubs, but also across different kinds of researchers. And I think also clearly the third edition, just as a comment, seems to focus a little bit more heavily on applying learnings to practice, which is a whole other art. And I think it's very interesting to see kind of the evolution of the different ears, kind of as a function of that new objective, which has always been there from the start, but it's clearly like more of a priority in this third edition, which I think makes sense.
Yeah, indeed. And I am impressed that NSF has gone to the extent of funding all, I guess they're 8 now years. Yeah, it's really impressive, because originally there was only GEAR. GEAR was getting NSF funding for geotechnical extreme event reconnaissance. Earthquake structural work was being handled to an extent by EERI. But the other areas, near shore, all of the others that I just mentioned, were really ad hoc. People would go out and look and do the research and keep it to themselves and publish it maybe. Now that NSF is funding these groups, every single bit of research that they collect in the field goes into Design Safe. Every single thing, every photograph, every note they take, every interview they do goes into Design Safe, and it's there for you to use. So yeah, absolutely get involved in the ears. There's an amazing amount of information there that one can use. and over multiple events. STEER has sent teams or done virtual reconnaissance on it's almost 50 events now over the last 3.5 years, or is it 4 or 5 years? I lose track. But it's phenomenal how much data are available in Design Safe now. So please get involved in the area that you're interested in. But yeah, we certainly wanted to focus more on that. We did want to focus more on the transition to practice, because that is a focus for NSF. It originally was very difficult to get funding for that transition, to take your research results once you finished with your experiments or your simulations and move them into practice. But NSF has created a new directorate, and I forget the title, but it has to do with technology transfer. And so there is funding available now for that technology transfer. So yes, we did want to focus on those aspects of the NHERI research program that hadn't been covered in the earlier editions.
Yeah, as kind of a follow-up on the same line of questioning, Giovanni asked in the chat, can you talk to us more about any of your experience about the procedure to follow to move research output to be included in the ASCE 7?
Yeah, so, well, my personal involvement with that is with tsunami research, not done under NHERI, but done under NICE, right? Oregon State University is still the premier location to do storm surge and tsunami research in the NHERI family, and they were also in NICE. And so I got a project from NSF way back in 2005 with a team at University of Hawaii and elsewhere around the country to look at or to develop performance-based tsunami engineering. There was no guidance on how we design for, or there was limited guidance on how we design for tsunamis. And so this was going to a 4-year project. We're going to develop performance-based tsunami engineering. And we used Oregon State University for 3 different sets of testing, analyzed those results, had an engineering practitioner from the very beginning in the proposal writing. Gary Chock, good colleague of mine here. He's a practicing engineer in Hawaii, one of the best on risk analysis, risk assessment, and structural design. And he was on our team from the beginning. By the time we got to the end of that project, we extended a year, so just 5 years. By 2010, he realized we had enough information to write a new chapter on tsunami design for ASCE 7. Right? There was nothing in ASCE 7 for tsunami design. So Gary and I put together a team of about 30 people, and we approached ASCE to fund it. You can't just become a committee and say, oh, I'm going to work on the code. And so it took us a while, but in January of 2011, ASCE finally said, okay, we'll fund your new subcommittee on tsunami design for travel and meeting space to develop this new chapter. And then in March of 2011, the Tohoku tsunami hit in Japan. And so immediately they gave us funding to go over. We were the first external group to go and do reconnaissance. And what we saw backed up what we'd seen in the lab. We could now validate at full scale what we had done in the laboratory at small scale. And an incredible opportunity. And so with all of that information, we wrote a chapter, and 5 years after Tohoku, exactly to the day, March 11th of 2016, ASCE adopted that officially into ASCE 722. So ASCE 716. So if you look, and it is now still in ASCE 722, we modified it a little bit. The subcommittee still works on the chapter. And we're now modifying it for ASCE 728. So if you look in ASCE 722 or the 16 version, you'll see chapter 6 is tsunami design. That came from NICE, NHERI, NSF research put into practice. So yeah, I'm very proud that was the accomplishment from our research. We drew from other people's research as well, but had we not done our own, had we not gone to Tohoku, would not have happened. That chapter would not exist.
Yeah, I lament to say that it was an incredible opportunity to be able to learn from kind of right when it's top of mind. And so fascinating too, because tsunamis are like hurricanes, like by nature multi-hazard. So it provides also an interesting kind of lens through which to approach many other kinds of natural hazards, which maybe traditionally have not been viewed that way, such as earthquakes or many other kinds. So very, very, very cool. Anamika, do you have a question?
Richard has a question first.
Oh, Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, great. So my question was more related to academia. I guess with your expertise and since you're also an educator, where do you see, I guess, well, universities are integrating hazards and resilience engineering courses. So what direction do you think is best? Is it, because I hear a lot of multidisciplinary, maybe we should be teaching social science along with engineering courses, or maybe combining them all into one, or what do you think?
We should. It's easier said than done, unfortunately. I've been trying for, well, years, decades. I've been at the University of Hawaii for 32 years now, and we have been trying from soon after I arrived. I've been working with architects to try just to integrate architecture and engineering, and that has been a struggle. So to get it even broader into social sciences and into other areas is really difficult. People have their silos, and they like their silos, and the deans like their silos, and so it's a challenge. But there are communities, there are places where it's happening. We do have in the University of Hawaii a center that was developed, National Disaster Training Center. I forget the NDPTC. I don't know what it all stands for, but it brings together all of these aspects. So it's not a department, but they do offer some courses. And it brings together the engineering, the social science, the policy, the planning, urban. It's actually in the urban planning department at the University of Hawaii. So yes, there are efforts to try to integrate. But you, as a faculty member, when you get there, because I'm hoping many of you are looking at becoming faculty members, we need your help. When you get there, you can do that. You can start initiating because the desire is there. It just takes the energy to push it forward. You can invite social scientists. You can create courses that are collaborative between you and a social science faculty member, and hopefully you can break the ice on that issue. Yes, Anamika.
Thank you, Professor Villa. Actually, my question is, I think, a little off track, but I was thinking all this NSF is now more focused on community resilience and more community based. So what about research that are more eccentric and, as you said, like more into silos? So are we still continuing that? Because I didn't see them any on the research of the 7 that you showed here. So digging deeper into the science or digging deeper into the physics, actually understanding what do we have a future for those researchers? What should we do? What is NSF's outlook on those research?
Yeah, I didn't quite hear clearly, but I think you're asking about how do we improve? Well, obviously the intent is to improve community resilience, but that requires research on all areas, and not just engineering. And that's been the problem in the past. We focus just on the engineering solutions. We need to look at community solutions, social solutions. How do we and educational solutions. We need to educate communities as to why they need this. One of the trickiest things is actually to educate a community that is exposed to a hazard, but hasn't had that hazard for many decades. And they lapse into thinking, well, it's not going to happen to us. Florida Panhandle is a good example, where they hadn't had a hurricane for many, many decades, and then Hurricane Michael hits, and where did this come from? And now Idalia hits the Florida Bend. So yeah, there's research opportunities in all of those areas, and I think the one that we have overlooked as engineers is working with the community. Educating the community, the sociology and the psychology of the community, and whether or not they'll accept advice, and whether or not they even think they need the advice is a real challenge. So there's a lot of research in that area, in developing community resilience. It's not an engineering solution. It has to be a holistic solution.
Actually, am I clear?
I'm sorry?
Am I clear? I'm
It's not quite clear. I would probably
It's not-
speak right into your microphone.
So actually what I wanted to ask was, what about more engineering solutions? Like you said, we are looking for holistic solutions, but there are areas to still improve in engineering solutions. So are we
Yes.
still focusing on that? NSF
Oh,
still-
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sorry. Yes. Okay. I misunderstood.
Mm.
Yeah, NSF was a little concerned when they heard that we were trying to incorporate social science into the science plan. They were saying, well, wait a minute. You're an engineering infrastructure that you need to focus on the engineering still. And we said, absolutely. That is our main focus. Apart from Converge, all of these facilities are engineering facilities. We're absolutely intent on developing solutions to engineering problems. But if we do that in a vacuum and they never get implemented, what have we achieved? And so that's why the social science becomes important. Absolutely, we need to develop solutions to all sorts of engineering problems. And they're out there. There are communities. One of the things I didn't mention about the new science plan, we've added a vignette, if you like, a one-page description of how Babcock Ranch in Florida survived through Hurricane Ian. Unfortunate that it had my name because it was so devastating. But the Babcock Ranch, designed for the flooding, the wind, the effects of hurricanes, and survived throughout. The electricity stayed intact. They have solar panels and self-contained. Their sewage system worked. Their water supply worked. Nobody got flooded. Nobody lost their roofs. I mean, it was an exemplary example of how residential construction has learned from our engineering experience. There are other problems we need to solve, but one of the big ones is how do we get everybody to build like that? How do we? That's a challenge. But yes, we still have to solve a lot of engineering issues. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Natalie?
Thank you.
I'll just ask a quick question so we don't go over time. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I had a question about, you mentioned the use of buzzwords like artificial intelligence and maybe even resiliency in certain proposals. As a lot of us are still graduate students or rising research scholars, what is a tip that you can give us to avoid using these buzzwords superficially and actually
Right.
integrate that into a research?
Yeah, it is a good point because NSF, the reviewers are not dumb people. They're smart. They're in your field. They know what they're looking at and what they're looking for. And if they see artificial intelligence, machine learning just thrown in as buzzwords, and you don't have a clear plan of how you're going to use them to solve your problem, they will see right through that. So don't just add them because they're now the buzzwords for NSF. But if it's appropriate that your project can use artificial intelligence, for example, a lot of people are using it for these extreme event reconnaissance, using satellite imagery and trying to identify how much damage, how many tiles have been lost from a roof. It's down to that kind of resolution now. How you can use Street View camera, right? You know the Street View in Google Earth. We collect Street View data after every major event. Steer sends out teams to drive the streets. If you can figure out a way where machine learning can learn from all of those images to do a task of finding out how many windows were broken, or how many garage doors failed, et cetera, rather than have somebody physically walking through on their computer and trying to do it, which is how we used to do it in the old days. Absolutely use it, but don't just throw it in there as a catchword. That doesn't work.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Yes,
Well,
thank
thanks
you so
again.
much.
I am running a little over. Yep.
Yes, but no worries. I mean, we're not going to kick you out, but thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. This was such a wonderful way to learn more about the NHERI network and the priorities they're setting for the next few years. And I'm so happy you could make it. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
No problem. Thanks for attending.